Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts, and you are listening to the Giving Town podcast, where we share stories of hope and generosity in a wonderful community of Newberg, Oregon, and the surrounding area. This podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Driftwood Roberts Group, and we're licensed brokers with Premier Property Group, LLC. We are passionate about serving our clients well and educating people about the many aspects of real estate, and that's why we have a YouTube channel where we do just that. We educate people about Newberg, about buying and selling, as well as many other things related to home ownership. If that's something you're interested in, you can check out our YouTube channel, which is linked in the episode description. Today, I'm talking to Elise Yarnell Hollamon with the Community Wellness Collective. We covered a lot of great topics, including how this organization got started, what its mission is, as well as some misconceptions people have about it. We also discuss some of the significant challenges surrounding mental health and some potential ways that we might be able to overcome them. And with that, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hey everyone, I am here with Elise Yarnell Hollamon, who is the president of the Community Wellness Collective and also wears a couple other hats, being on the city council and also works at Providence here in Newberg. So Elise, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So looking forward to discussing the Community Wellness Collective because, again, we were just talking before we started recording that the Wellness Collective, at least how I've always seen it, has been, there's a lot of resources on there about here's all the different things in town. And then what this podcast kind of does is take those and then expands on them, tells the story. Obviously, it takes me a little more time to get through that many. But I would love to hear more about what the Community Wellness Collective is, how it started, kind of what the story is. So I look forward to you sharing that today. So about that, can you just share what's the purpose of the Community Wellness Collective and how did it get started?
Yeah. So Community Wellness Collective purpose is to decrease the stigma in accessing mental health and addiction services, while in parallel trying to de-silo community partners, healthcare agencies to stop duplicating services when services are so limited, and try to work together on a closer level to decrease the gap in services to mental health and addiction services.
Okay, and so by de-silo, can you break that down a little bit, what that means for all of us to know?
So I'll also say that Community Wellness Collective started, fun story, I had moved to Newberg in 2016 with my family and was working at Providence, Newberg, and wasn't involved in the community at all, but was looking for a way to get involved. And during that time, we lost a number of kids to death by suicide in the 2016-2017 year. And I had been hearing through my work at Providence of these kids that had been struggling, and then kids that were still struggling, and really trying to figure out how could I get involved. At the same time, the school district reached out to Providence, myself, and asked if we could come in and support what was a SWAT team approach to risk scoring the kids for risk of suicidality. At the same time, there was a parent group that was, if you can believe it, at the time, it was not super political in this community. And there were parents on the right side of the aisle, parents on the left side of the aisle, coming together and saying, what can we do to get our kids help? And so both of those things happening at once, the school district working with Providence, parents really working closely together and collaborating. Kristen Stoller and I ended up meeting at the Chamber of Commerce event, their annual awards dinner. And she said, we need to talk. I hear that, you're trying to create mental health resources in the school. There's a group of parents that want to support this. We have ideas. We feel like the parental voice is not being heard. And so that really was what began the Community Wellness Collective. Also happening, the Austin Family Foundation they're incredible. They've been a huge resource to this community, not only financially, but in terms of just a leadership perspective, especially at playing a neutral political role, which I think is so needed at this time in the community, but was then as well. And they ended up gathering a group of mental health providers, which at the time included Lutheran Family Services, HHS, so our Yamhill County mental health team, Providence, and we all came, and then the school district, we all came together and really did this forum type style conversation with Austin Family Foundation of what services we provide and really how we could collaborate better. And that was one of those experiences for me, not only professionally, but personally, that I felt super convicted and gut checked of we're all doing great things, but we're not really talking. And we bear responsibility, not only as organizations, but as a collective community for every kid that we lose. Yeah. And so that really spurred the Community Wellness Collective to its formation. And we had broad support and really no opposition to the Community Wellness Collective when we started and as we continued on having these what we called gatherings where we would have conversations related to mental health and addiction. So that is the origin story, and a lot has happened since then. But I'm really proud of the collaborative relationship that we started and that we've maintained and grown over the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's great to hear how it's hard, the circumstances, but it's great to hear how so many people who may disagree on different things can come together on such an important topic. And I think it's important to remember that that's really what this is still about, is that the health of the children and making sure that they can get the help that they need. And it's kind of implied in what you said, but what specifically do you think having all these resources come together, why is that so important for the community to have it done in that way?
First off, in the United States, access to mental health is horrible. But in Oregon, we rank 50th in the country, so that's last place.
Ouch.
In terms of accessing mental health and addiction therapy.
Why is that?
Which is crazy and a massive failure, and dare I say, as a Democrat, a massive failure of progressive government agencies and legislation, and really a lot of work needs to be done at the legislative level, but that's not a conversation for today. But then you take that to a rural community, 50th in the state, a rural community that doesn't have the stand-up of the larger organizations in the Portland metro service area. You have great organizations in our community, but they're less funded, right? And so you may have a meal every day, but they're all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. One soup kitchen isn't running 7 days a week. You can go to a different church a different day to get your dinner. So coordinating where you can find dinner on one night historically has been, a flyer that's updated by a group of churches, shared onto social media, but not a coordinated way to say, I can go to this place and know where I can find dinners 7 days a week, breakfasts 7 days a week, where to go to get therapy, where to go to get help with transportation services. So all of the social determinants of health resources that impact someone's mental health and addiction. So the outcome, right? There was no central place to really go to navigate those things. There is something called 211, which most people know, but 211 is a state-funded program and has been really under-resourced historically. And when standing up the resource guide for Community Wellness Collective, we found out that Yamhill County for 211 was also shared with another county, and the person that was doing it wasn't very knowledgeable of the resources within the county.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
and for, not everyone recognizes, 211, a number you can dial, but many people, especially in younger generations think, okay, what can I find online?
Yep.
Right. And so if you're not having a, one place that you can dial and know all those things, especially if they're not even knowledgeable. But especially with mental health, there seems to be one of the big things is, for the amount of, do you have the stats on, you may or may not, because I'm just throwing this question at you, but how much of an increase there's been? Because I know from whether it's just not being diagnosed or is kind of swept under the rug, but, in years past, but now it seems like there's a very, a sharp incline in cases of need for mental health. Is that true, or is that just kind of
and it's only been compounded with the pandemic, right? And I think that just our generation, I don't know how old you are, but I'll take a guess, our generation versus our parents' generation also have different environmental factors, right? We're so heavily dependent on social media, on what are very isolating behaviors. And so there's lots of research and data around the incline of mental health nationwide, worldwide, in the last decade. But I would say that the situation that we were in 2016, in Newberg specifically, that really spurred on this work, was abnormal. And it was abnormal from a statewide perspective, and really alarmed a lot of organizational leaders that there needed to be an amplified response, not only from the community, but then also in a coordinated effort across organization.
And so with the increase in need, in demand, there, from my understanding, has also not been an increase in the number of providers, of people who can actually provide mental health support. So what do you do with that? Okay, you come together, you do work to try to provide help, but does it ultimately come down to, okay, how many providers are there and how stretched then are they, or how do you get around that?
Yes. So, so we didn't talk about getting into this part, but I'll tell you that my perspective, and this is kind of wearing my political hat a little bit, and I should always preface which hat I'm talking with, but Measure 110 which decriminalized drug use, which, by the way, I support, and was not done in a way that that legislation passing was not done in a way to support those individuals that would have received a citation or an arrest for that drug use to access treatment, right? And so we passed a law that then we weren't ready to respond to as a healthcare community. And, and then our state banked all these taxpayer dollars and have had, nearly $2 billion sitting in their fund to distribute to providers that we don't have, to help people that we're supposed to be helping.
Interesting.
And that's my very watered down version of what I believe has happened. But, there's an absolute crisis level of shortage of mental health providers, and even more so addiction. And for some reason in the United States, and I would say I have noticed an amplified viewpoint in Newberg, mental health is other. Mental health is seen as, a failure or something to be ashamed of. And being raised in the church, I think that we're so lucky to be in this community of such a vibrant faith-based community. And I've been super impressed with our faith leaders to really rally around this work too, because even though we don't have the amount of mental health providers we need, since 2016, I feel like there's been a real response from faith-based leaders as to how they can support this work. And I'm hopeful that in years to come, we will look back on this time of Newberg as, it's a stain, in my opinion. But it's really rallied every level of resource we have, knowing that mental health providers, we don't nearly have the amount that we need currently, and that we're going to need in 5 years post-pandemic. effect.
Yeah. And I know probably a lot of that is a separate conversation, but when it comes down to it, I mean, it's all kind of core to this whole conversation. And one of the things that I think, and this is, I'm not by any means a mental health professional, but through, and I love reading personal growth books that used to always be called self-help. And it's like,
yes.
Even that connotation is like, oh, you need help. Like, well, there's actually so many things about life that are not understood until you actually get down to like, okay, what causes depression, anxiety in the first place? And I'm not qualified to speak on that. But one of the things that I personally have noticed is that when there's a breakdown in relationships in community and people don't have vulnerable, authentic relationships with people, that can lead to more mental health. So that, because there's the truth, yes, we have a severe lack of mental health professionals, but why is there an increase in anxiety and depression, and what's kind of the underlying cause of these things? And I'm very much, so my background is, I was a mechanical engineer by degree. So I think of the first principles, okay, what's going on here? What are the things that we're not willing to talk about or discuss? Some things like in the film, The Social Dilemma, how everything's becoming digital, and how that's a very low level of communication that doesn't provide the same thing that a one-to-one face-to-face conversation can.
Totally.
And at the same time, feeling like you have to present a certain version of yourself and can't share your struggles and with someone. And so if you feel like you're constantly having to display a version of yourself that's not true, this is just my thought.
No.
But what I would love to see, and maybe that's part of what the Community Wellness Collective does, is what are some of those key things that hey, these are, have high correlations with mental health. How can we provide some of those things? But it's also at a very cultural level, and it's really hard to do things that are not, it's like, great, okay, you have an event where people can come and talk and be vulnerable. It's like, okay, but that's forced. It's not really authentic. But that's just kind of some of the things I think about, is a lot of these things need to be done, in my mind, in tandem. My wife, for example, I know she wouldn't mind me sharing, she had to be, for a long time on anxiety medication, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you go in to see a provider and they say, oh, you have anxiety, take this pill. That's such a Band-Aid. And some people may really need that for a time. Maybe some people need it permanently. But when there's not, okay, what's going on? What are the thoughts you're telling yourself? What are the stories you're telling yourself?
Absolutely.
Understanding how your mind works and where those thoughts come in. And just for example, we allow oftentimes ourselves to talk, we talk to ourselves in ways that we would never communicate to another human being, calling yourself oh, I'm an idiot, or I can't believe, you're so stupid, you'll never, whatever. Realizing wow, that's actually really ridiculous. And I personally also come from a faith background. It's how insulting to, in my belief, how insulting to the person who created me to call a prized creation, worthless. And whatever your value on human life is, your own life is no less valuable than someone else that you care about. And so just those simple things is don't allow yourself to, self-deprecating humor, I think is fine to a degree, but I don't know, just those little things that we don't often talk about. And so apparently I'm on a soapbox that I'll get off of.
I will share, I have a theory on social media, and it's very related to what you're saying. That the way people talk on social media is a vision into their self-talk. And if I can be so bold, it is completely crazy and outrageous to me the way that we communicate in this community, specifically on social media. I don't think that most of the people that have the courage they do on social media would have the courage to say those exact things to someone's face. And I do think that that's a reflection of, how you speak to yourself and how you view yourself, of how you're able to so quickly in an impulse say something like that to someone, because those are impulsive thoughts that I don't think that when they're coming out of your mouth, you would actually be able to say them. Yeah. So yes, I think that Community Wellness Collective, since its origin to where it is right now, has evolved a lot. And the original intent was to bring people together with differing opinions around a joint vision to rally around youth, rally around people, and, believe that each person that is a resident in this community, we need and want here, period.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about the philosophy and all those things, but on a tangible level,
yes.
What does it look like on a day-to-day basis of the actual work of all these people have come together? They said there's a need. Okay, now what does that actually look like?
Yes. So the resource guide was one of the things we developed, and we developed it together with stakeholders and community members through our different gatherings. And then we've kept it updated through grant funding that we have received from different organizations to keep that as up to date as we can. It then was imported into a survey-based platform on our website, communitywellnesscollective.org, where you can really break down what you're looking for and where you're at within Yamhill County, and it'll spit out resources based on what you're saying you need.
Okay.
So that is tangible right now. Could go on and look for a resource that would support whatever need you're having. Other tangible things that have evolved. So one is supporting the coming together of different community partners for Newberg Public Schools. That started in 2017, and then the Wellness Center space opened in 2018. There's a lot of misconceptions out there of what actually that space is. But Community Wellness Collective, just to clarify, was the gatherer of the organizations to come together to not be siloed, to de-silo. We provided funding for the space. We outfitted the space, the furniture, the paint, all of that good stuff. But in terms of the operating of the day-to-day of the Community Wellness Collective, that was never run by the Community Wellness Collective. We were like the convener of the people, then handed it to the people to provide the services day-to-day. And then also something that Kristen and I have been passionate about is that we are not the service providers. We are the people that bring people together to have the conversations. That shifted a little bit during the pandemic when it was just really brought to our attention, just the severe need around housing in our community and the impacts of COVID on families that were already struggling, that then became houseless during the pandemic. And so we had the opportunity to support the stand-up and formalization of what has been the emergency shelter in Newberg that has deep roots, has been a service provided through different churches over the years, for like the last 15 years or something. But we were able to help create a relationship between the emergency shelter and YCAP to take over what is now Harvest House, to provide daily, nightly sheltering meals, showers, laundry, for anyone that walks in. And so that has been a service that we never had the intention to support, and who knows how long we'll actually be the organization supporting it, but we've supported the growth of it to get it to a stable, functioning place. And we're really proud of that, because, on a nightly basis, we have upwards of 35 people that are there. And it's just been a really big service to our community that's involved a lot of different organizations, from Rotary to churches to Providence to HHS, lots of different involvement.
So through all these different things, how have you seen specific lives be impacted? Like, what's the actual result of all these people coming together in the de-siloing? So clarify for me, because I've heard that phrase, but I don't know if I know 100% what de-silo actually means. So explain like I'm 5.
Well, I hope I explain it. So in healthcare, we talk, why is healthcare so expensive? First off, because we all operate as our individual private organizations. It's not a government run one healthcare platform, right? We all have our individual things that we stand up, whether we have all of our specialties, we have all of our primary care, behavioral health, we each have it. right?
Gotcha. Okay.
So when you come out into a rural community, it's the same with community-based organizations, right? So meaning a nonprofit. So Lutheran Community Services, UNIDOS, we all are providing some level of service, but we aren't beholden to each other, right? We're not required to say, hey, Lutheran, what are you planning to fund this year to expand your mental health with my Providence app? I, in the past, would not be calling a community-based organization to ask them what services they're planning to grow. Okay. If anything, in the past, we try to compete, right? And say, how do we get the market share?
Okay.
This is to do the opposite, to say, how do we coordinate what you're going to stand up, what I'm going to stand up, knowing that resources are limited, knowing that our funding pot, we're working from the same grants, we're talking to the same funders. How do we provide a joint effort so that we're covering every basis of care that needs to be cared for within this community?
Okay. So basically, instead of every organization doing lots of things, mediocrity, doing one or two or maybe three things really, really well, which is kind of like in any, you think from an organization, and if you think of the town community as an organization, you don't want everyone doing everything. You want each person in their specialty, because that's how they can really thrive and get better at it. So that makes a lot of sense. So the de-siloing that you're talking about is having collaboration between each organization, each nonprofit, to work together and say, okay, if you're focusing on this specialty, then maybe if we were going to do that, supposedly we can put our efforts elsewhere and refer people to you because you have that specialty rather than wasting resources. So that makes a lot of sense to me. An
example, just so I can put in perspective, is through the Austin Family Foundation Forum that we had, Lutheran, Providence came together. Providence said, we're really better with adolescents, not elementary, middle, right? With the providers that we had. Lutheran said, we're actually better with early childhood. So Lutheran covers elementary, middle through an MOU with the school district, where Providence would cover the high school through an MOU, playing to the strengths of each organization and not competing over, shared, a limited pot of dollars.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the Community Wellness Collective was kind of the catalyst to allow those conversations to really start, or maybe initiate some of those. Yep. Okay. So is there any story specifically that you can think of where you're like, wow, this is what the Community Wellness Collective, this really fulfilled our mission? Are there any specific stories or people that stand out that really benefited in the way that you'd hoped for when you'd started this?
I can think of lots of stories, but specifically our youth, which I think all of us can, put our differences aside and say that at the end of the day, we want the youth of our community to be safe and thriving and healthy, right? And I can think of one youth in particular, if you want an actual example of a person that was really at risk in our community, mental health, suicidality, and they just over time didn't have the family support to walk through that journey of mental health, and has been, over the years, very engaged within mental health. I see them throughout the town constantly and working, and a person that honestly, when I met them, I really did not know if I would see them in a year. And there are lots of kids like that. And there are lots of people like that where, I'm pretty open about it, but my driving force of why I'm involved in mental health and addiction is because I'm in recovery and have 9 years sober. And the only reason I made it was because of my family. And really getting to know a lot of these kids and people within our community that struggle with mental health and addiction. It is my absolute responsibility as someone that's making it, who was given that real blessing from my family of support, to give that back in every way that I possibly can. Yeah. And it's really triggering for me to see even conversations today around, addicts and crime and houselessness. Like it's all, these other group of people that we aren't going to support. I mean, it's just tragic because, every one of us knows someone in our lives that struggle with addiction. And every time that we see that type of messaging out there, it prevents that person from outing themselves for help. And preventing what could be homelessness, preventing what could be crime, right? The stigma of mental health and addiction, in my opinion, is why it leads to, 10 steps down the road that it didn't have to.
Yeah.
So that's where I feel like it's our responsibility as a community to remember the examples, remember the people around us, remember our own story, and have the courage to step into your own story and allow the people in your life the courage and opportunity to step into their own story, and for us to value that person as an entire being and not just, the piece we want to see.
Yeah. I think it can be really challenging when you haven't known someone personally, or if you haven't experienced it yourself, to recognize the things we take for granted.
Sure.
And it's easy to look at someone and say, oh, I never would do that. I never would have done that. It's like, well, you actually don't know. When you hear the people's stories, honestly, when I volunteer with people who they're in a situation where maybe I maybe would have said, oh, I wouldn't do that. Or if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't have done that. But when I hear the story, like, I don't know if I would be alive if I'd experienced what they'd experienced. So I think what you said is so good. Like we have a responsibility, even if we've, we haven't experienced it ourselves, but we have more than we realize. And I think, I don't know if saying we owe it is the right term, but I think there's a level of love and compassion that as human beings we should have for each other to overcome some of those differences.
Absolutely.
So what are some things that I know some of this we talked about, but what are some things about the organization that people don't know that you really wish they did? Like, okay, people always seem to think this about the Community Wellness Collective. I really wish they would see it for this. Are there any specific things that you haven't already touched on?
I think overall it's, I'm not a real responder on Facebook to comments, but I see it often, and just a total misunderstanding of how Community Wellness Collective was started, who was involved when it started, and what the purpose of the organization really is. I think that, and especially in a small community where leaders wear multiple hats, it's easy for a leader wearing one hat for that hat to bleed into another. And so, and that's no one's fault. It's just the impact of being involved. But I will just say the governance board that we have for the Community Wellness Collective, it is very diverse. In political views, in religious views. And it's super sad to me, honestly, that, the conversations that we have had through Community Wellness Collective, and then where we are today as the health of our community. I think people would be pretty surprised to know who those original people that were at the table for the Community Wellness Collective are. It's not your progressive, super, super liberal people that are, that have run Community Wellness Collective. It is a really healthy mix.
Yeah. I think it's just that, I appreciate you clarifying that, because I think sometimes people will make assumptions about that, or really of many things that I've seen. And I really don't like getting into politics. Sometimes it is hard to avoid, for sure. But when there's assumptions made that really could be clarified with like, oh man, if only you actually understood, you'd probably support this more than you thought.
Yeah.
And I see that, I've always seen that. And that's so sad to me, but that's just kind of where we're at. And that, as a culture and a society, it's something we're going to need to figure out eventually. is how to stop making so many assumptions and, figure out, okay, what's actually going on and become informed before we, start talking really loudly.
Yep.
And pick up the phone and call someone. That's one of the hardest things to do. But if you disagree with someone, I'm just going to say this, because I've been spending a lot of time around Ron Mock and, the gift of disagreement. It's super hard to do, but when you disagree with someone, and there was someone that I strongly disagreed with, and someone encouraged me, hey, you need to actually get coffee with this person. I really didn't want to, because I was like, I can't see how this person is even close to being a good person. I had a really good conversation and realized, okay, there's still things I disagree about, but I was completely wrong in my assumptions of a person's character.
Yep.
And judging a person's character without knowing the person or talking to the person, just don't do it. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, progressive, independent, whatever. Don't judge a person's character, even as much as you think, and it's hard. There's probably people I still do it too. Because it seems like there's so much evidence, but we just don't need that. Let's learn to be kind to each other. Okay, so again, off my soapbox. I don't know why I'm so passionate about certain things today.
You could join the Community Wellness Collective.
I've joined way too many things. So for people who, now that they understand a little bit more about what the Community Wellness Collective is, how can they support the Community Wellness Collective or get involved?
I can't believe it. So honestly, in my perspective, the way you can be the most supportive of the mission of the Community Wellness Collective is to engage in conversation. And so much of what we went through in 2016 and 17 with losing youth is just being willing to have conversations around mental health and addiction. And not othering that conversation and not, telling your child or your spouse or your friend, like, to not talk about it and that, we'll figure it out. It's going to be, no, like we should be treating mental health like we're treating diabetes. Would you tell your diabetic spouse to just don't tell anyone that you can't have sugar? Like, no, you would not. And so that, I think, is just, probably the hardest thing for people, but the most impactful in prevention. Other ways is that, Kristen and I do plan to have another gathering soon where we'll kick off with a topic around mental health. And so we would love to have any person, and truly any person, to join that. And then sharing of the resource guide, I think, is really important, because oftentimes you don't know. It could be, one of us, that we don't have a need for a resource. Well, you don't know when that's going to happen for you, right? And you could be in a crisis within a month with some, tragic event taking place. So making sure that people know that resource is available to them. If you are a resource for a social determinant of health need, submitting your information via the website so that we can add it. We are not exclusive. Any type of resource can be added to the resource guide. And so we want it to be as robust as possible. So that's another way. And then I think just as getting as involved in the community as you can. Everyone has a gift, has a talent. What is that, and how can it contribute to the community in a healthy and positive way? That looks different for every person. And I think that that's great. But really challenging yourself to give back, instead of asking what you can get, I think, is something really important.
Well, this podcast, it's stories of hope and generosity. And I think just that, what you said, the generosity piece, true joy and fulfillment, from what I found and from what I can see, is when we learn what we can give. Yep. It really is more blessed to give than receive. Not that it's not great to receive things, but I think true fulfillment comes from what we give. The hope part, question I have for you is, from what you've seen and been involved in, what are some things that give you hope for Newberg's future?
At its core, I've never lived in a community as generous as Newberg. I know that the foundation and core of our community is good. And I think it's just getting us back to remembering that each of us has something good to offer, and choosing to see the good in each person rather than what we disagree, and labeling them as something that is something to be fearful of, right? And so I hope that people like myself and yourself can inspire people that, there is goodness to be found. And of course, there is also justice. And a lot of times we want to run to healing, right? And I think a lot of the conversations I've been engaging with on both sides of the aisle, my conservative friends and my liberal friends, there's this desire to heal, but healing can't happen in my mind until you have reconciliation. And reconciliation really for me comes from honesty, and that rigorous honesty to say, here's where I've been at fault. And when you model that, it's always very surprising the return you get. It's very rare you're going to apologize or ask for forgiveness from someone and then not meet you with the same. So I hope to see, reconciliation within this community that involves honesty and openness to hearing where people have really been wronged on both sides. And that gives me hope, because I know at the core, our community is good.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's a really powerful answer. And I think a good reminder of, even when we believe that we're only 10% wrong and someone else is 90%, if we can find the 10% to apologize for, and as humbling, and maybe sometimes it's easier to dig in our heels, but if by doing that, we can let, someone else can let their guard down and apologize for at least some of their 90%. And maybe in their mind, it's the opposite. Maybe in their mind, it's you're the one who's 90% wrong.
Most likely.
And that's usually, very often, I know I'm completely wrong and they're right, but I'm going to tell, usually people don't do that. So anyway, no, thank you for that. That's, I think that's really helpful. And I think that's a really good, I think it's a good point, because I do believe there's hope. I think there's a lot of hope, which is why I have this podcast about it. So thank you, Elise, so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to seeing how the Community Wellness Collective can continue to improve the conversations and ultimately the mental health of all of us involved. And I know we will continue to do what we can to facilitate that.
Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed learning about the Wellness Collective and the work they are doing to promote and improve mental health in our community. To learn more about this organization, you can go to communitywellnesscollective.org, which I've also linked in this episode description. On that website, you'll also find a pretty comprehensive list of community resources, from food, housing, transportation, crisis services, family services, the resource rooms, case management. There's so many great resources there, so please go check that out as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast and listen to it, it's really the person-to-person sharing that allows most people to listen to this podcast, and that's how most people find out about it. So by sharing it, you're allowing more and more people to hear about all the great people, the great organizations that make this community such a special place. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.